And I've made sure that we've got time for discussion. So we've got actually 3 times for discussion in the middle of the presentation. This is, I'm thankful that you would take your time to come and be here. And I'm thankful for an opportunity to talk about like how broken our hearts are and what we can do about it. Because I know I actually just finished a 2-month break from social media. So I popped back onto social media this week to let friends and family know about this presentation. And I really believe in the power of transforming social media and being involved in civic and civil discussion. But we always want to come from a good place, in a place of rest. And so I just came out of a kind of a sabbatical time of just kind of simplifying life a bit, and one way to do that is not to be involved with social media for a while. But now I'm back, and it's great to see everybody. What I want to do is share the screen here, so hopefully this will work, and you should be. Oh, that's not what I wanted to share. Hold on, let me stop sharing that. That's no good. All right, share the screen. Yeah, that's what we want to do. Share my address. Now, are you all seeing this or not? Oh, hold on, let me do it like this. So you should be seeing my PowerPoint. Is that showing up?
Yeah.
Yeah, looks good.
Technology is amazing, thank you. So this is, I retitled the name of this talk to The Mess We're In. And I think that we all feel like we're in a mess. I love this photo. It kind of represents how I feel life has been in 2020. We've got obviously the crow. I think they're crows and not ravens. They look like they're about the size of crows. And you know, this has been sort of a really tough year for us, and we're fighting each other. And so what my hope is for today is these 4 things. We're going to learn more about how to build connection with people, especially people that we disagree with. On Facebook, friends and family have been torn apart. There are family members who disagree on things politically, and they have a hard time talking with one another. People have been unfriended. We want to be able to build connection and gain understanding, restore civility, and then move forward together. And I'm absolutely confident that we can do this. And so hopefully we'll have some good discussions today, and you'll find some things that are useful in order to achieve this. I want to tell you just a little bit about the Intellectual and Spiritual Humility Institute. I'm currently the director of the Institute at Roberts. And as you can see, the Intellectual and Spiritual Humility Institute provides teaching opportunities like this one, focused on bringing communities together. We're in a divided, polarized, wounded society, so we want to create space for the respect and the dignity of all people. And we want to make it a place where we can actually exhibit a kind of humility that does not mean putting aside our convictions. But it's a humility that focuses on the humanity of other people and puts our love for them first. And so the Institute sponsors a number of events. This year we have 2 events planned in the spring, one of which is called the Congress to College program. So we will have 2 politicians come and speak to us. We're looking high and low. We're looking under every stack of hay for the needle, where we can find a Democrat and a Republican who have worked across party lines and have treated one another with civility. So that's happening in the spring. We're also having a seminar on intellectual and spiritual humility in the spring as well. And we're waiting for the dates just to see how COVID works out. Another opportunity I want to let you know about, and Michelle's going to add these links to the chat box so you can access these things. The website, you can go there and just kind of see our website. We're going to be putting more up there in the near future. You can also sign up for the Edgewise newsletter. This is a newsletter that gives advice, encouragement, strategies, blog posts, videos, and news. It comes once a month. You'll also be informed about events, and you'll also get a link to the video for this presentation. And if intellectual and spiritual humility is something you have a passion for, you can also donate to the Institute. And if you'd like to, you can donate in a way that supports a specific interest that you have, maybe bringing someone to campus or starting a new program that you're passionate about. So I wanted to share that with you before we got started. All right, so I looked this up in the dictionary because people always say that I have a lot of it. And so what is gall? People say, the gall of that guy. And apparently it means that I am known for bold and impudent behavior, such as the bank had the gall to demand a fee. One thing I have the gall to say is to disagree with the people who hold this position. They say never talk to friends or family about religion or politics. And I have the gall to say no to that. In fact, I think it's the exact opposite of the truth. I understand definitely why we end up there, but it is it's these things: religion, truths and ideas about God, ethics, abortion, the death penalty, Black Lives Matter, issues of racial justice, immigration. These are important human issues. And if we can't talk to our close friends or our family members about these things, who are we going to talk to? We'll end up as a society where there's no more dialogue. And then the people who are in power, who are cynical and who bend every bit of energy to manipulate us, will be able to do that. So the free exchange of ideas and emotions and perspectives is just crucial. And so I do believe that we must engage one another. And I think we can do it in a way that's profoundly productive and civil and breaks down the barriers that are between us currently. So some of you took Latin. I have something in common with Julius Caesar. We both have Gaul, or he had Gaul. The first line of the Gallic Wars told us that Gaul was divisa in partes tres. And when I put this together, I realized this presentation is also divisa in partes tres. We've got 3 parts to it. So in this small way, I am like Julius Caesar. And in other ways, perhaps not. Like, maybe I'm not as mean as he is. He was not known necessarily for civility and bipartisanship. So the first set that we're gonna talk about is "It's Not You, It's Me." Part 2 is "It's a Fine Mess We've gotten ourselves into." That's a very old reference. My students would have no idea who that's referring to. My parents probably barely knew that. And then "Getting Ourselves Out of It." So it's not you, it's me, a fine mess, and getting ourselves out of this mess. And in between each of these sections, we are going to have a little bit of a discussion. So you have a chance to ask some questions, and we'll have some back and forth. So it's not you, it's me. The base problem we have in our nation, in our communities, among our friendship groups, and in our families when we're divided, is the issue of character, right? So polarization and nastiness in our families and nation are really about a lack of character. And that's good news, because lack of character can be fixed. It's one of the things that we really focus on at the college. It's one of the things that we focus on in the church. And it's one of the things that we focus on in my ethics classes. So I am convinced that while there are outside factors that cause us to be torn apart from one another, it really is an issue inside of our hearts that we allow ourselves to be torn apart. And so I want to start with that, the issues of character that are involved in this situation. I believe in civility. I remember growing up during a time that was very divided politically, but you saw political figures treat one another with a certain amount of respect and deference. I remember when Ronald Reagan passed his huge tax cuts, and it was during a time of great economic turmoil. and he passed these tax cuts, and the leader of the House talked with him, gave him a phone call afterwards and congratulated him. And he said, boy, Ronald, old boy, I can't believe that you got this done. You did a heck of a job out there. He said, the economic future of the country is in your hands, and I wish you nothing but the best. I can't imagine that happening these days, right? Somebody gets their program passed. The next thing, there will be a press conference about how horrible that person is and how they just destroyed us as a country. So civility is something that we used to have. Many of us still have it in certain relationships, but it's time to bring it back to our country. And civility is an art form. It's the soil of true community and connectedness among people who are very different, influencing others to be their best in themselves and in their relationships with others. And civility involves respecting and savoring and furthering the humanity of everyone in the community, especially those who disagree with us. And we have the resources to do this, to have this attitude. We're interested in the truth, but we're more interested in people. We're more interested in love. And that is the foundation of civility. Now, intellectual humility is going to be the key virtue for civility and the key virtue for bringing our community back together. And I want to emphasize a few things that intellectual humility is not. The first thing that intellectual humility is not is a lack of conviction. And I think if someone is humble, you think, well, I'm not really going to hear much from them, right? But this isn't always the case, right? The humble person has just the right knowledge and perspective on himself or herself, and puts themselves in the context of circumstances and community. And so someone with intellectual humility is someone who has a great deal of conviction in what they believe. This is not an issue of them lacking conviction in what they believe. It's also not a lack of courage. People might think, gosh, if you're not browbeating other people and giving a hard sell to get them to believe what you believe, you must not have courage. You don't have the courage to speak up for your convictions. That's not the case with intellectual humility either. It's not a lack of conviction, and it's not a lack of courage. It's also not an uncritical sort of tolerance. And we'll talk in a minute about what tolerance is, but some people think that they're tolerant, when in fact, they're just lazy, and they don't care enough to think carefully through things. They don't care about truth, they just don't want to be bothered. That's not true tolerance. And intellectual humility is not some sort of uncritical tolerance. It involves actual tolerance. And then finally, it's definitely not relativism. So the intellectually humble person is able to interact beautifully with other people, can build community even with people who disagree, and can have productive and fruitful conversations with them about the matters of greatest importance. So these are the things that intellectual humility is not. It's not a lack of conviction. It doesn't mean that you don't have courage to stand up for your convictions. It doesn't mean that you're uncritical and you're just kind of waving off the issues. And it certainly doesn't mean that you're a relativist. Intellectual humility, as with all virtues, is a mean between an excess and a deficiency. So this comes from Aristotle. It's brilliant and true, and it's really transformed my life to think in terms of every virtue being a mean, and thinking whether I'm going to the excess with regards to that issue or going to the deficiency. So think about the deficiency. This is a vice, the vice of intellectual insecurity. This is somebody who really knows things, but maybe because he or she's not very good in arguments, or because they don't recognize that so much of what we know directly through experience. And so they don't trust their experiences, right? But they're insecure about what they believe, so they do not want to talk about ideas, and they don't want to offer those ideas to other people's insights and criticisms, right? So that's intellectual insecurity. The virtue of intellectual humility is a person who has firm beliefs, or perhaps they don't, but they can certainly have firm beliefs. They know what they believe, they know what they don't know about, and they have an open mind. and say they have enough courage to be able to stand up and say, I believe this, and these are the reasons why, but tell me about your experiences. Why do you see things so differently? Let me understand your way of seeing things. And the person with intellectual humility is not afraid to change her mind about something if new evidence comes her way. And finally, we have intellectual arrogance. I didn't want to put any human's picture there because, if it resembles any of you, you would think I'm trying to pick on you, and I'm not. So I don't think anybody here looks like a rooster. We're at Roberts Wesleyan, our color is red, so maybe some of us do. The intellectually arrogant person just thinks that anyone who disagrees with them is an idiot or they have bad motives. They think they know everything, and that if anyone believes differently, there's really something wrong with them. And so this kind of arrogance means you're not going to pay attention to other people. You're not going to allow them to impact you. You're not really going to listen to them. And so intellectual humility is that perfect place in between intellectual insecurity and intellectual arrogance for promoting a flourishing human life and a flourishing human community. So where does intellectual humility come from? Well, the first thing, as with all virtues, is that it comes through practice. So this is another piece of wisdom from Aristotle. We fix in our mind what our values are through our thoughts and through reflection and through study, and for a Christian through prayer. Though Aristotle was before Christ, didn't have a chance to make that connection. And then you practice your values. You put them into practice, and you mold your emotions and your desires to fit your values. And so habituation or practice is what creates intellectual humility, as with all the other virtues. And then the other place that intellectual humility comes from is a very important distinction. And that is the truth versus our grasp of the truth. And I have great confidence as a Christian in the truth of Christianity, and more so in the reality of God and God's love for me and God's love for the world, right? And there is an objective truth about that, and I think that I have a good grasp of it. I also realize there's so much that I don't know, right? So if somebody feels like, if someone conflates these two things, so that they conflate the truth and their grasp of the truth, then they never will feel free to consider any little change to what they believe, to consider anyone else's viewpoint, anyone else's experiences, or anyone else's evidence. Because to do so is a lack of loyalty to the truth that they believe in, right? But for me, for instance, as a Christian, it's not a lack of loyalty to Christ if I really listen to other people's perspectives. In fact, that's how I'm supposed to live out my faith in particular. The Christian faith tells us that we should love other people as we love ourselves. What do we all want? We want respect. We want to be heard. We want to be understood. We want to be taken seriously, right? So I leave where my beliefs will go and how I will end up after this conversation. I leave that in the hands of God. But if I didn't believe in God, I could do the same thing. I would have the courage to say, I want to be with the truth. And if someone can show me that I don't believe the truth, then thank you, right? So we don't want to conflate the truth versus our grasp of the truth. The truth is as solid as can be. Our grasp of the truth can come and go, right? Can waver and can be strong. So that distinction, I think, leads to intellectual humility. And then these facts can lead to intellectual humility. We've all been mistaken. A very famous philosophical treatise by René Descartes starts out in the first paragraph with him saying, gosh, there are things I was certain of when I was younger that now I believe are false. So how do I know that the things I believe now are true, right? And we've all been in that place. We've all made mistakes. We've believed things that we now no longer believe. So that in and of itself should tell us that we should be open to new evidence. There also is just the very obvious fact that our thinking and our experiences are incredibly limited. So I've lived one narrow slice of life. Not only have I only experienced things, let's say, as a white male, right, and an American, but I haven't lived all of the experiences of the other white males who are in this Zoom room, right? boy, my experiences are incredibly unique and they're incredibly narrow. And so I don't even understand my own experiences. I misremember them, right? I've been around the world a long enough time that my thinking, my memory, my experiences are extremely limited. I'm teaching a class right now called The Case for God, and it's one of the things that it's one of the mistakes that evangelical atheists make. Those are, atheists who will not let theists be. They've got to convince them to be atheists. And they have such a high view of reason that they think reason, especially scientific reason, can establish the truth about everything. Well, it's just not possible. And so every one of us should realize we're on this tiny planet in the middle of a huge solar system, in the middle of a huge galaxy, and we've got a limited period of time on this earth. Our thinking and our experiences are limited. And once you realize how limited they are, it brings about some humility, right? And then finally, look, we're human beings. And this is one of the things I'm also discussing with students in The Case for God. Look, we're incredibly vulnerable. We're emotional. We're subject to all kinds of biases. And we're vulnerable to distraction. We're vulnerable to depression. We're vulnerable to making mistakes. And we're just vulnerable as people, and our intellect is vulnerable as well. And so we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute also. So let me just say here, I'm going to just briefly put these up here, and if you have any questions or want to talk about them, we can talk about them at our first discussion break. These are all virtues that are needed for civil and fruitful discussions. And I won't touch on all of them right now, but I think it's a wonderful thing to when you look at a list of virtues and you see the vice of deficiency and the vice of excess, and you can actually try to determine where you are on that scale. And I've actually done this. I'm a nerd this way. I have actually, every month, I haven't done this in a little while, but for a while, for every month, for the virtues and for the elements of the thriving life, for a well-balanced life, I gave myself a score from negative 10 to positive 10, where the mean was in the middle. And then the negative didn't mean anything more than the positive, right? But I would every month say, how was I with epistemic humility? How was I with empathy this month, right? And so I think it's a very powerful and yet simple schema for understanding human excellence. And just notice, what do I need if I'm going to really have epistemic humility? I need courage. I need to be able to say, I love truth and I love goodness more than I love my own comfort, more than I more than I love my side being right, my political side or my church or whatever it might be, right? Tolerance. True tolerance means that I celebrate your humanity, and the fact that you even exist is amazing. And I celebrate it, and I love you, and I support your ability to believe things in accordance with your conscience and to live them out. But I also respect you so much that if I'm in a relationship with you, we can have discussions about what you believe and what I believe, right? And if I disagree with you, I can share that with you. And if you disagree with me, you can share it with me. So tolerance is not a lack of criticalness. It's an openness, and it's completely compatible with having strong beliefs. Empathy, obviously. I'm going to skip pragmatic idealism for a second. Level-headedness. We are so emotional about the things we care about. And I've got some slides to discuss why that is the case. But boy, if we have my son or my wife or somebody that I love who disagrees with me about this election coming up, boy, does that hurt. It's emotional for us, and we get frustrated very quickly. And so I need to be able to handle my emotions, my anger, my disappointment, and my hurt. And that's being a level-headed person. Acceptance means that I recognize what has happened or what will happen, most likely. I don't obsess over it, but I'm also not resigned. I'm going to say, okay, well, what can I do to make things better next time around? If my side loses this election, for instance. And then optimism. If I were a humanist and didn't believe in God, you can still have optimism. Hey, I trust in humanity. There might be some reasons that you wouldn't totally trust the progress of humanity, but there's a lot of ways that you could just be optimistic, which means you don't have to panic and convince everybody to believe like you believe right away. You have some kind of a faith in the arc of history, let's say. And if you're a believer in God, like I am, I have ultimate faith that everything is in God's hands, right? And that ultimately, all of the good that God wants to produce will be produced. And so I'm just responsible for what I'm responsible for, not for the whole universe. And then let me just kind of mention pragmatic idealism. We all have ideals. These are the things that we would love for our families to achieve. We have ideals for our own lives. We have ideals for our city. If you live here in Rochester, right? We've been going through some tough times. We have ideals for our country. The pragmatic idealist thinks, how can we best achieve those ideals? And that person will be patient enough to work with others, to make incremental movements if that's all that's available. In football, football's in my head right now. Someone was mentioning the Bills. Something you always hear in football is the offense took what the defense gave them, right? The pragmatic idealist takes what the defense gives them, which means they stack 7 in the box. That means they're going to throw the ball. The pure idealist throws the ball. Every play is a bomb, right? Every play is a flea flicker, right? Pragmatic idealism, I believe strongly, and this is the direction of my country, but I know we can only move there in a way that is productive and healthy and safe if we talk with people and we move incrementally and strategically towards those goals. All right. The last thing before we take a break for discussion is I wanted to share this with you, and it gives us some perspective, I think. I love the article, The Weight of Glory by C.S. Lewis. And near the end of that, this is what he says. There are no ordinary people. You have never talked to a mere mortal. Nations, cultures, arts, civilization itself, those are mortal. And their life is to ours as the life of a gnat. Now, I wouldn't bring this up if we were already living in an era where we're thinking primarily about human goodness and the health of the soul. But it's a necessary corrective for us now, because we get so upset. If this person's elected president, these horrible things are going to happen to our nation. And so we obsess about it, and we cannot be patient with friends and family who disagree with us, because we are thinking about what's going to happen to Rochester, what's going to happen to my college, what's going to happen to my family, what's going to happen to the United States. Those things are important, but let's keep it in perspective. Countries come and go. Civilizations come and go. Art, culture, they're beautiful, but they're like the lilies of the field. They come and they thrive and they go away. You know what's more amazing than the United States of America? Any particular person in this room. What's more amazing than Europe or than Russia or than Bangladesh, right, is a human being, from my perspective, made in the image of God. And so I feel called to be involved in civic discussions and to bring my country to a place of fuller blessing. But I know that the ultimate results are in God's hand. And I never want to use human beings as a means to some sort of end for my political agenda, because I'm seeing it completely opposite. I'm using the most beautiful piece of art that has ever been created in order to get a dime, a dirty dime from the floor, right? So I love this quote from C.S. Lewis, and it helps give me the perspective that I want to be actively engaged in transforming my society in accordance with my understanding, actively engaged in my faith and sharing it with others. But I cannot do it without love, because without love, it's all for naught. So this is a good time to take a short break and have a little bit of discussion. And what I've asked Michelle to do is to look at the questions. She's going to open up the chat room, the chat box, and you can type in your answers, or I don't know, Michelle can decide if we can work it out to call on people and have them be unmuted. That's a little more personal. So any questions you have about the discussion up to this point, I would love to answer those questions. So I'll show you briefly what you missed, but I can make this whole presentation available as well. So let me go up here and press play. So in the part that I'm not going to present, just going to kind of speed through. Actually, I can exit and just navigate my way here. What I wanted to talk about briefly is that we are, oh, can you see the polis beings and such? Good, good. So Aristotle said this, I think it's scriptural as well, but that's not my field, but we are polis beings, which means that we really thrive in the context of a community that has a common history that's large enough to be self-sufficient, but small enough to be where everyone can make a difference, right? And everyone knows one another. And so we are polis beings, we thrive in that kind of environment, common conception of the good, shared values, shared meaning. But the polis has been broken. There's in our country, we're so divided. Rochester, by the way, is not big enough. It's too big to be a polis. People have so many different views on the good. And I think that's part of our brokenness as human beings, right? So it really hurts us when people with other narratives or other values cannot see our values or our narratives. We feel wounded, especially when they're close to us. So especially when they're family members, right? That hurts the most. So we live by certain narratives, and when other people disagree with them, then that gets to the very heart of our identity, to our sense of meaning and our sense of belonging. And I'll bring this up just real quick as well. What does that mean? That means that we tend to respond to these issues emotionally more so than rationally. So political issues, it's our emotions that guide us, and reasons kind of along for the ride. We have a lack of clear thinking, and we tend to otherize, which means if you don't agree with me about these core values, you're not one of us. And so I'm going to treat you as less than our group or our tribe, and I don't really need to interact with you or listen to you. I'm just going to condemn you, right? And that's kind of it's a reaction to the fact that we were supposed to be a polis, but you guys see it so differently. You're messing things up, right? We're also left very vulnerable to manipulation by the people who would lead us. We've talked about lack of character, and I mentioned means end thinking. Everybody becomes Machiavellian and becomes a utilitarian in order to get their person in office or to get their person on the Supreme Court. We can't afford to do that if we want to be truly human, you know, and we have to look at the means and not just the end. So so those are some of the things we talk about. What I want to do, though, is move on to strategies for civil and fruitful discussions. And I'd like to go through these very quickly, maybe just about 10 minutes, so that we can have some more discussion. And again, I can make this whole presentation available to anybody who'd be interested in that. So the first thing we need to do is recognize the role of emotion. We are not robots. We're not just objective evidence evaluators. We're human beings. God made us this way. We're emotional. We have desires. We have frustrations. We're human. And so let's not pretend that this is only about reasons or ideas. It's about emotion first. And so a great thing to do is to start off, and I've done this and it works beautifully. Don't ask people, what do you think? What do you think about Trump's border wall, right? Or what do you think about Trump's tax cut? How do you feel? If you ask somebody, how do you feel about the border wall? It's very subtle, but it makes you want to share your feelings, right? And if they say, well, I think it's blah, blah, blah. No, I didn't ask what you think. How do you feel about it? What does it make you feel? And someone who supports it makes me feel safe, right? It makes me feel like our culture is being preserved. It makes me feel at home, right? Or if someone's against it, it makes me feel angry. It makes me feel like we're shutting out the very people that God would have us to minister to, right? So you start off with emotion language. Now, I'm going to give some other advice in a minute. There are some people maybe you can't do this with, right? But let's connect emotionally with one another. And then let's mirror one another's emotions and empathize. So if I said this to Michelle and she said, I feel safe. Wow, so you feel safe. What are some other things that make you feel safe? You know what makes me feel safe? and I can empathize with Michelle on her feelings of feeling safe because the border wall is being built. So then we're making a human connection, right? I'm interacting with somebody who is the most amazing piece of art in the history of this physical planet, a human being, and I'm connecting with them. And once I feel understood and connected with, I feel a connection to you and you feel a connection to me, I'm more likely to be open to you and to be kind to you and to empathize with you. Share real stories. I always kind of, I have always sort of looked at politicians who did this and kind of shook my head. I know what you're doing. Like, I met a woman in Kentucky last week. She's working 3 jobs and her psoriasis is just killing her. And I'm thinking, okay, but that is a hasty generalization fallacy. You're taking one person's story and then you're trying to make, we need better healthcare, right? That's a fallacy. But the sharing of stories does not have to be, it can be separate from our arguments. If we share personal stories, people remember those and are influenced by those and can relate to those. So I've decided, I think we should actually share these stories. And then when we get a chance, let's proceed to objective evidence. How likely is that? How common is that? In discussions about the Affordable Care Act, I saw 2 friends talking about this, and one felt like people were being, a lot of people who were uninsured were being insured, and the other friend had a small business and he had to close one of his businesses and their premiums went up. It's just good to share our stories and then say, well, what do the statistics show, right? So share the stories and then move on to objective evidence and then appeal to shared moral values. We both agree that we want this country to be safe, right? Or we both agree that we want everyone in this country to be treated justly and with equity, right? How do we get there, right? So so take the time to just celebrate and share your shared moral values. And some important virtues here, level-headedness, empathy, patience, optimism, right? You can be patient if you're optimistic that this process can work through. And if you care more about the human being and doing things the right way than you do rushing to get to having all of your ideals in place. Number 2, think precisely. This has been so helpful to me. I want to know, what is the situation? So who am I talking with? Is this a stranger who just commented on something while I'm in line at the 7-Eleven? Or is this my wife, right? Is this my father-in-law? Or is this somebody on Twitter who's a troll, right? Well, how I interact is going to be different. What my focus is thriving. I want to help that person thrive. I want them to help them grow. I want to grow and thrive, and I want us both to have more understanding. So how can we do it? So what is our relationship? And then how much time do we have? What can we accomplish? Sometimes we try to accomplish everything in 5 minutes. I'm going to convince this person to vote for my person while we're on the bus or while we're sharing an Uber together. No, how about, probably if you're on an Uber together, the best thing you can do is better understand that person's position. And you could ask them if they have any questions for you, and maybe you can plant a seed, right? So we want to think precisely, and then we want to clarify, right? Okay, a lot of times we'll get stuck in narratives, you know. Hillary Clinton hates America, and she has a child slavery ring, or Trump is beholden to Putin, and Putin is pulling the strings. He's Putin's marionette. Okay, let's get beyond these huge narratives. Let's discuss something concrete and let's agree on what good evidence would be about that issue, and let's make progress. Now, this is especially important in a relationship that someone that you can know for a long time. And what I have wanted to do is maybe connect with some good friends who are very different from me politically and commit to doing this for a year, right? So that we can actually make that progress. But if you're talking about your husband or your wife, your partner, your best friend, your pastor, you can invest the time to really clarify, to break things into smaller parts. And then again, you want to paraphrase. So what I hear you saying is that if we raise taxes as Biden wants to do, this is what's going to happen to the stock market. And is that right? And then the person has a chance to respond to us and say, it's not quite right. What I actually meant was this. one of the things my son and I did, which was great, I would start telling him something and he would roll his eyes. And then I realized, oh, he's heard this before. He says, I know what you're going to say, Dad. And so I said, oh, well, tell me what I was going to say. And then sometimes he knew exactly what I was going to say. And so I realized, oh, he knows this. He doesn't need me to say it. But other times he didn't say what I was going to say. He actually got it wrong. I actually wanted to make a different point. That's powerful. And so that's something I like to do is tell me what you just told me this. What do you think I'm going to say in response? And then have the person kind of respond for you. It's really neat to paraphrase arguments and to give each other a chance to kind of figure that out. And then acknowledge gradations of justification. My main area of focus besides ethics and philosophy of religion is epistemology, which is the study of knowledge and evidence. And if you listen to radio, to political radio on the left or on the right, it's these people are idiots because they don't agree with us. This is right, and there's nothing to support the other side. Well, the fact is there are degrees of probability, there are degrees of evidence, there are degrees of justification. Let's be comfortable with that and say, hey, you give me something to think about. That kind of lessens my confidence a little bit in what I hold. Let me look into that, right? So be comfortable with gradations of evidence, gradations of justification. Otherizing is when we, again, look at the other person as a different sort from us, almost as not really human in the worst case scenario. But we otherize when we hear, for instance, if a Republican says those Democrats hate America and they want to destroy America, or if a Democrat says the Republicans hate the poor and want to grind them into the ground. Well, why would I listen to someone who hates the poor and wants to grind them into the ground? Or why would I hate someone, if I love America, who hates America? Well, those are just ways of otherizing so we feel like we don't have to listen to one another, right? So we should resist that. And when we hear people doing it, we should challenge them on it. Say, wait a minute. If 50% of America believes differently from me, I want to investigate that. There's got to be some kernels of truth to it, because people are by nature knowers, right? So let me see what I can learn. I'm not going to accept it if you just tell me everybody who disagrees with you is an idiot. I know that that is not true. You're otherizing. And so let's use our imagination. That's something that I heard Herb mention in a previous talk. Let's use our imagination. Imagine being another person. I can imagine being an atheist because I was one once. I lost my faith for a while in college, but that doesn't mean I understand the atheist experience. But if I were interacting with Ty or another friend who's an atheist, my favorite uncle is an atheist, I just imagine, I'll sit back and think about his life and what happened and what his experiences are and how what is it like to experience a world without God, right? Or what is it like to experience the world as someone from a different political perspective, as a deep believer in Trump or as a deep believer in Bernie Sanders, as someone with the burn, right? Well, we have wonderful imaginations. We're creative. Let's take the time to do that, right? And again, let's appeal to shared moral values. And then finally, let's explore narratives. Narratives are fascinating, right? Let's understand the specific narratives, broad narratives about America or about the meaning of life or about the world, and specific narratives about personal responsibility, about justice, about prejudice. Let's understand the narratives that the other person has. Help them to understand it because they may not have reflected on it. And then we want to identify our own narratives. Well, my narratives are, this is my basic story, right? And once you recognize your narrative, then you'll realize, oh, I want to make sure that I've got the right narrative. I want to open myself up to evidence that undermines that narrative to make sure that it's well-founded, right? And then let's relate to one another's narratives. So if there's anything that we can agree with in the other person's narrative, let's do that. Do we agree on origins? Do we agree on the obstacles to our well-being? Do we agree on the best source, at least 1 out of 5 of the resources that are needed to solve our problems or the solutions? Do we agree on the ultimate destiny, but everything else is different? Let's agree where we can agree so we feel connected. And then let's work slowly on understanding why it is that we disagree. Okay, so that's where I want to end. I think I did that in just about 10 minutes. So let me stop sharing and see what else y'all want to talk about, because I do believe that 7:30 is our end spot. I can stick around longer if anybody is interested. So let me leave here.
We have a anonymous question in the chat.
Good.
So I'm just going to compile it, a few parts. So you talk about gradations of justification. Other than health concerns, what are the gradations of justification for abortion?
Yeah, so this is one of the things we're talking about abortion next week in philosophical ethics. And I want to be kind of clear on this. This is my approach is I believe it's unjust for professors, and this is not true maybe of a math professor, right? If they tell you what the quadratic equation is, I don't feel like that's unjust. But when we're talking about moral issues, I do not tell students in class what I believe. Occasionally I will, because for instance, I hold to a consistent ethic of life. And I share that with sometimes 1 out of 4 classes, I'll share that because I want them to see how you can think consistently through these issues, right? But I will share the concept of the consistent ethic of life every semester, but I don't share it as my view. And that's because it's unjust, and it's actually a kind of violence if I enforce my views on other people, because I have power over them. I give them their grades, and they're trusting me. And so my job, I'm a servant to my students to give them the tools they need so that they can they can think through things carefully. They can develop critical thinking skills and intellectual humility. They can understand ethical theory, and they can apply it to these issues. When it comes to abortion, I have a very strong view on abortion that comes from moral intuition and comes from philosophy, and also is influenced by my faith. But I don't share that with my students because I want them to really think these through carefully. So I believe there's a very, I really have a strong view on abortion. I believe it's correct. But I have my students watching 2 videos next week on abortion, and they're both terrible. They're short. One is by Bill Nye the Science Guy, and it's a pro-choice argument. And the other is by a blogger named Lisa Smiley, who is, I had never heard of her before I saw this, and hers is called It's a Baby. And I tell my students this: look, if you say it all comes down to this, a woman has a right to do what she wants to with her own body, or it all comes down to this, we need to protect the innocent life of the unborn, you're begging the question. There's a lot more involved. There's at least 3 or 4 stages to an argument on abortion that has integrity. And so, but the vast majority of arguments on abortion are sloppy, and you're just preaching to the choir, and you're not showing respect to people from the other perspective. So, well, I don't want to get into the details of this particular issue. We have to determine the status of the fetus. Is it a person, a bearer of rights? And what are our criteria for personhood, and can we apply them consistently to other life issues? We also, if the unborn is a bearer of rights, where do those rights come from, right? And then we need to know, what rights does the pregnant woman have? And then you have to compare the rights of the pregnant woman to the rights of the fetus. The other question is this: of some things that are true, the evidence for it is so strong that any good-hearted, rational person should agree with it. For other issues where there's an absolute truth with regards to the ethical issue, it is possible for good-hearted, rational people to see it differently. And so you have to ask that question with abortion. Is it possible for good-hearted, rational people to answer these questions? There's 3 or 4 steps in a good argument that's pro-life or an argument that's pro-choice. Can people see it differently? And is it just to make something legal or illegal if people see it differently? And those are tough questions to answer, right? So I believe strongly, I have a strong view on abortion that I feel very strongly about. And I would love to talk privately with anybody about it who wanted to discuss it. By the way, that's the way I am with my students as well. I tell them that I'm a Christian. That comes out in my teaching. I'll interact with you pastorally. If you want to meet with coffee, I'll share with you anything that you want to hear, and we can talk about ideas, and I'll be open with you about where I currently am on anything. But in the classroom, I don't want to misuse that place. So I do understand, like, we can, and that's not, abortion is not the only issue. For people who are in this room tonight, there are some things we feel so strongly about, and we just can't see that that anyone with integrity could hold the opposite viewpoint. And I think we still owe people, because of their humanity, even when we think that's the case, to get to know them, to understand their vision, how they feel and why, and then to explore the idea, you know. So if I answered the question, that's good. If not, you can come back.
I just want to ask a question. We're recording right now. Do you want me to pause for the rest of the discussion? You want to keep going?
Oh, I'm okay with it record. And if you don't say who, if people
can be anonymous.
You can ask the audience. If people can ask questions anonymously, that gives them privacy. I'm happy to answer questions. You know, I'm happy for it to be recorded.
So I can ask one of the questions in the chat here anonymously. So how do you engage with someone who has a differing opinion and is trying to impose it on you?
That's a great question. So first of all, imposing can mean a couple different things. If by imposing, it means that they're really annoying and they keep bugging me, trying to argue with me, if that depends on the relationship, right? If it's my wife, then she can bug me for the rest of my life. I'm committed to her, right? If it's my family member, yes. If it's a student, yes. Keep bugging me. I've got to put parameters. I got some other work to do. We can't meet every day, but let's talk. But here's the thing, and this comes back to, I talked about irascibility. If that person, and we're still under one definition of impose, by the way, if that person is somebody who will engage in a faithful and authentic way with me, right? Then, in other words, if I can tell that they will listen after I've listened to them, they will try to connect. They're not just preaching out of just violence, like just trying to get me to believe what they believe, no matter what, and they don't care. It's not narcissism. Then I will continue to do that. So if they're imposing their belief in that annoying sense, I think that's great. That means that they love me enough that they want me to believe the truth, and they're exploring ideas. If they're able to do that with integrity and love, then that's great. The other issue would be imposing, right? So let's say, for instance, that I believe in birth control, and it's very important to me, and I want to have control over my reproductive rights. So let's say that I'm a woman in this case, and I work at a Catholic school, and they will not provide, they will not pay for or you know, with health insurance my contraception. So they're imposing their viewpoint on me. That's a situation where I think that's a difficult one, and that's an internecine discussion for the Catholic Church in particular, that has a strong and long view about contraception that has integrity. But if I choose to work at that sort of a place, I don't mind them imposing their viewpoint on me in that regard. Now, what about me just being an American citizen? And let's say that I'm pro-choice, and that I really believe in the right to have an abortion, and there are people who are working to make this illegal. There are some of those people who are people of good faith, I would say, or might be people of good faith, right? I certainly think there are plenty of those. If they're a person of good faith, that means they'll really listen to my perspective. And they want to pass a law that's going to directly impact me. But that's the nature of democracy. A good-hearted person who will listen, I will respond to and really try to serve and love and change. But I would just say, and maybe this is the motivation behind the question, and the questioner could add another, could do a follow-up. Boy, when you're out of power, and people in power who don't empathize with you and are not listening to your perspective, they pass a law that outlaws something that that is important to you, a religious practice or a personal practice, that's got to be deeply discouraging. And so I think we've all been in a place where that happens in our country. None of us, and it might happen in our family, the decision goes your sister's way and not your way. It is frustrating. But yeah, as long as the person is, I think this is the way God treats us as well. He is all love, but his love, if I am stubborn and mean and horrible, that love is going to hit me as judgment. And so we'll be cut off from God for a while. So I might have to cut off somebody who's really being unjust and really being rude or really being imperious. So I hope that answered the question.
I believe, Mark, do you have a question? You're unmuted.
Yeah, I had to raise my hand because I tried to send this to everybody, but I didn't Zoom right, so I only sent it to you, Andy. So you can ignore it because I'll ask it now.
Okay.
Would you comment on the idea that perhaps there are times when the only way you can be intellectually humble is to actually be silent and communicate non-verbally?
I love that. Absolutely. I love that, right? Because this is the nature of all the virtues, by the way. When I first heard that Aristotle says that the virtues are relative to the person, I thought, oh, that's relativism. But no, it just means that how this virtue is expressed is going to be relative to the particular situation, right? And I will say that this is something that I felt strongly about when George Floyd was killed. I spent a long time on Facebook just listening to people, and I didn't try to interact because that for me is the first step, because I know that the killing of an unarmed Black man is going to impact my friends and brothers and sisters who are African American. It's going to impact many of them just differently from me. I cannot experience it the way they do, so I want to start by experiencing it as much as I can and by listening to other people's perspective and just being quiet, And there's and so in this discussion of the relationship between police and the African American community and our search for justice, it's going to be a long one, right? And so there are many different stages and times and places, and we need to move to a place where all the important stories are heard and empathized with. All the evidence is really studied and carefully looked at, and the best policies are brought to bear. So I love that. Honestly, just being silent. If you don't have a strong viewpoint on something, or here finally you're talking with someone who can really defend this position, and you just want to listen and learn, that makes sense to me. Is that what you were thinking about? What's the time that you would think of where intellectual humility would mean silence for you?
Probably mostly with my wife.
And was that I don't know if that was a Rodney Dangerfield joke or if that was actually a particular dynamic there.
Well, I just think probably that these things are most important to you in your most important relationships, and for most of us, that's our most important relationship. So that's probably where we need to tread, most carefully.
I think that's a great point. I'm a philosophy professor, and even in this conversation today, you've asked me questions. I think this is the first question I've asked back. So that's not ideal. That's how I would prefer to do it. Is to ask what you think and why, right? And as a philosophy professor, married to someone who's not a philosophy professor, my inclination is a 4-part argument that has sub-arguments, and that's not what's necessary. The bottom line is, how, with me and my wife, or you and your wife, how do we move towards deeper love, more understanding of one another, and more understanding of the truth? And whatever it takes, if it's silence and just listening in many occasions, then, and I think it is, I think that's great.
Well, I'll just do a little follow-up. An affirmation is that in the candid conversations that actually they had here at Roberts, I listened to one of those, and when they were talking about how non-whites and whites could come together, the non-white said, if the other side would just listen to us, that would be a huge beginning.
Hmm.
You know, they just need somebody to stop and say, yeah, we hear what you're saying.
You know, yeah, I have watched all of those, and my ethics students have as well. And I think there was the first one on reactions to George Floyd's killing, and the second one on how to be an ally. I'm not sure which one you were thinking about. I think that probably the first one, right?
Yeah, no, I missed the first one. Sorry.
Oh, so it was the second. They're all up there on YouTube, or they're on the Roberts website or the Robert channel there. But yeah, I agree with that. And my first inclination, and I know this is not just about that issue, as an analytic philosopher, my first inclination is to analyze things. And that's not, if I have intellectual humility, I cannot start there. I've got to start by listening.
Thanks.
Yeah, thank you.
We are at 7:31. We want to be mindful of everybody's time. I'm not sure, Andy, if you want to stay on for those who can.
I'm very happy to do that.
Recording.
Yep.
Awesome. Well, we just want to say thank you to everybody who joined us today for this conversation. We could talk for hours, I think, on this topic, and I see many more of these in the future, I think. Thank you so much for being part of this Stay at Homecoming. And just want to remind you, tomorrow's event on understanding inequality in healthcare is going to be an amazing conversation tomorrow at noon. I will put in the chat here a link if you want to register. It is still available for registrations. But I will end with that. And you're welcome to go.
Thanks everyone for coming. And I'm very happy to stick around, especially since we had so many questions. It was more like I was pontificating a bit. So I'm happy to stay here as long as anybody wants to have conversations. But thanks for coming, for those who have normal lives and are ready to get to them, back to them.
Thank you.